The Galactic Military Academy's Grand Lecture Hall buzzed with the typical chaos of third-year tactical studies, but today's entertainment wasn't coming from the holoprojector. It was coming from the back row, where Earth's first exchange student sat with the kind of steelness that made predators nervous. Emma Thompson had been enduring this for 3 weeks now. Food scraps bounced off her uniform, whispered insults in 17 different languages filled the air around her seat. A Zephyrian cadet had just launched what appeared to be fermented algae paste at her head, which she dodged without even looking up from her datapad. "Look at it just sitting there," hissed Cortex, a hulking Bruthan whose species had conquered 47 star systems before breakfast. "Doesn't even fight back. Typical Deathworld cowardice." The irony was lost on him entirely. Every alien species in the Academy had read the same sanitized reports about Earth. A marginally habitable Deathworld with surprisingly resilient inhabitants. What they hadn't read were the classified xenobiology warnings that came with Emma's enrollment application, warnings that currently sat buried under bureaucratic red tape 3 levels deep in the Academy's administrative system. Emma turned a page on her tactical analysis homework, ignoring another projectile that splattered against the wall behind her. Her breathing remained steady, her pulse hadn't increased. To any human observer, she looked like a college student dealing with annoying classmates. To anyone who understood Deathworld psychology, she looked like a coiled spring waiting for the right pressure. "Maybe we should feed it to the combat drones," suggested a Corvan cadet whose crystalline features sparkled with amusement. "See if Deathworld meat tastes as tough as it pretends to be." The Zephyrian who'd thrown the algae paste leaned forward with predatory interest. "I heard their bones are so dense they can't even float in water. Primitive evolutionary mistake, if you ask me." Emma's stylus stopped moving across her datapad. The motion was so slight that none of the aliens noticed, but her hand had gone perfectly still for exactly 2.7 seconds before resuming its note-taker. That pause contained more threat assessment than most species managed in their entire military careers. Professor Veltar, a Corvan instructor whose own species had never encountered a Deathworld, droned on about siege tactics while completely oblivious to the brewing situation in his classroom. The Academy's integration program had seemed like such a progressive idea 6 months ago. Bring in students from primitive worlds, show them proper galactic civilization, foster understanding between species. Nobody had bothered to ask what happens when you put an apex predator in a room full of prey animals and tell the prey animals they're superior. "Hey, Deathworlder," called out Prince Zektar, a Corvan royal whose crystalline crown marked him as someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. "You deaf as well as primitive? We're talking to you." Emma looked up from her datapad for the first time in 20 minutes. Her brown eyes swept across the lecture hall with the kind of casual assessment that catalogued exits, weapon availability, and threat levels without conscious thought. Every alien in the room suddenly felt like they were being measured for something, though they couldn't quite identify what. She didn't say anything. She just looked at them. The silence that followed was the kind that makes small mammals remember why they evolved to hide from things with forward-facing eyes. "I think it's broken," whispered a Bruthan cadet, his voice carrying less confidence than it had 30 seconds earlier. Emma returned to her datapad without acknowledging the comment. The movement was economical, precise, and somehow more unsettling than any threat she could have made. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the notation she'd just made in her tactical analysis homework. Hostility escalation pattern observed. Multiple species exhibiting pack behavior. Threat assessment. Minimal but improving. Prince Zektar's patience, which had been bred out of 17 generations of Corvan royalty anyway, finally snapped. He rose from his seat with the kind of dramatic flair that came naturally to beings whose species had never met a problem they couldn't solve with superior firepower. "Enough of this," he declared, his crystalline features catching the lecture hall's artificial lighting. "Human, I challenge you to formal combat. Single engagement, Academy rules, winner determined by submission or incapacitation." The lecture hall fell silent. Professor Veltar stopped mid-sentence about orbital bombardment patterns and stared at his students with the expression of someone watching his tenure evaporate in real time. "Your Highness," Veltar stammered, "perhaps we should discuss this with the administration." "No discussion necessary," Prince Zektar cut him off. Academy regulations clearly state that any cadet may challenge another to formal combat for matters of honor. I'm claiming insult to my person and my species. Emma looked up again. This time her assessment was more thorough. Prince Zektar stood 6.5 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton capable of deflecting small arms fire, with reflexes enhanced by genetic modification and combat implants that cost more than most planets' annual budgets. She nodded once. The nod wasn't agreement, it wasn't acceptance. It was acknowledgement that Prince Zektar had just made a decision that would fundamentally alter his understanding of the universe, assuming he survived long enough to process the information. Emma didn't stand up, didn't stretch, didn't crack her knuckles or assume a fighting stance. She simply set her datapad aside and folded her hands in her lap like someone settling in to watch an interesting documentary. "Stand up," Prince Zektar commanded, confusion creeping into his voice. "Face me properly." Emma remained seated. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, but there was something in the way she held herself that made the air in the lecture hall feel thinner. Every instinct that 3 billion years of evolution had given the aliens in that room was suddenly screaming warnings they didn't understand. "Is the Deathworlder afraid?" someone whispered from the crowd. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody remembered starting. Emma's eyes found the cadet who'd spoken, a Bruthan whose species had crushed civilizations under their boots, and for a moment, the Bruthan felt like prey. But Emma still didn't move. Professor Veltar was frantically accessing his emergency protocols, while Prince Zektar struggled with the growing realization that his challenge wasn't proceeding according to any script he'd prepared for. How do you fight someone who won't even stand up? How do you demonstrate superiority over someone who seems utterly unconcerned with your existence? And then Emma spoke for the first time since entering the academy 3 weeks ago. "Your move." 2 words, delivered in the same tone someone might use to offer directions to a lost tourist. But those 2 words carried the weight of a species that had clawed its way to the top of a food chain so vicious that most galactic civilizations classified their homeworld as uninhabitable. The lecture hall had gone so quiet that the environmental system seemed loud. Every alien present suddenly remembered that they were sharing space with something that had evolved on a planet where everything, including the weather, was actively trying to kill it. And then Prince Zektar made the mistake that would echo through galactic military academies for the next century. He attacked. Prince Zektar lunged forward with the enhanced speed his genetic modifications provided. Crystalline claws extended, moving faster than most organic beings could track. His attack pattern was textbook perfect, a diagonal strike designed to incapacitate without permanent damage, the kind of move that had won him 17 formal duels in the Corvan military academies. Emma's response was so economical, it barely registered as movement. She shifted 6 inches to the left, while her right hand came up in what looked like a gentle gesture, catching the prince's wrist as his momentum carried him past her chair. The redirection was minimal, just enough to use his own enhanced speed against him. The sound of Prince Zektar's neck snapping was audible throughout the lecture hall. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking, followed by the distinctive crystalline chime that Corvan exoskeletons made when their neural connections severed. The prince's body hit the floor with the weight of 6.5 feet of genetically enhanced alien royalty. He didn't move again. Emma remained seated, her hand already back on her datapad stylus. The entire exchange had lasted 0.3 seconds. She'd killed a being capable of bench-pressing a small aircraft without leaving her chair, and her pulse still hadn't elevated above resting rate. The silence that followed was the kind that accompanies the realization that everything you thought you knew about the universe was wrong. Professor Veltar stared at his classroom with the expression of someone watching his species' understanding of physics crumble in real time. The medical alert systems were screaming, emergency lights were flashing, and somewhere in the distance, automated distress signals were broadcasting to every major government in the galaxy. "Medical emergency, Lecture Hall 7, came the announcement over the Academy's communication system. "All available medical personnel report immediately," but the medical teams that rushed into the lecture hall found something that their training hadn't prepared them for. Prince Zektar wasn't injured. He was dead. Completely, efficiently, and with a precision that suggested Emma had known exactly which vertebrae to target for immediate incapacitation. "Dr. Kethral," the Academy's chief medical officer and a Zephyrian whose species had perfected battlefield medicine across 40 star systems, ran his scanners over the prince's body with growing disbelief. Catastrophic spinal separation at the C2-C3 junction, he reported to the emergency response team. Neural pathway completely severed. Death was instantaneous. Combat enhancement implants? Asked his assistant. Irrelevant. The damage bypassed all defensive systems entirely. Dr. Kethral looked up at Emma, who was highlighting something in her tactical analysis textbook. Someone check the human's homeworld classification, now. Lieutenant Mordex, an academy administrator whose job normally involved scheduling conflicts and meal preferences, accessed the galactic database with trembling appendages. What he found made his secondary hearts stop beating. Earth, he read aloud, his voice cracking. Classification, Deathworld, Class 9. Gravity 1.2 standard. Atmospheric composition, 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. Oxygen percentage considered toxic to most carbon-based life. Predator-to-prey ratio, 97.3%. Predator classification for dominant species. The medical team stopped their futile attempts at resuscitation. Surface conditions include extreme weather variations, seismic activity, volcanic eruption, asteroid impacts, solar radiation, aggressive fauna, carnivorous plant life, and atmospheric electrical discharge events occurring daily. Lieutenant Mordex continued reading, his voice becoming smaller with each specification. Dominant species survival rate in hostile environments, 97%. Combat effectiveness rating, unclassified pending further study. Dr. Kethral looked at his scanners again, then at Emma, then at the prince's body. She killed a Corvan Royal with her bare hands while sitting down, he whispered. A Corvan Royal with military-grade enhancement implants. The classification report includes a note, Lieutenant Mordex added, his voice barely audible. All interactions with human personnel require prior approval from the Galactic Deathworld Safety Commission. Educational exchange programs are specifically contraindicated without extensive psychological evaluation and environmental adaptation protocols. The realization hit the room like a physical force. They'd been treating a Deathworld apex predator like a primitive student from a backwater planet. They'd been throwing food at something that had evolved to hunt creatures that made Corvan princes look like children's toys. Emma turned another page in her textbook. The Academy's emergency alert system kicked into full activation as administrators 3 levels up the chain of command suddenly understood that they had a diplomatic crisis of unprecedented magnitude on their hands. The Corvan Empire's heir apparent was dead, killed by a human exchange student in what could technically be classified as a sanctioned Academy duel. Automated lockdown protocols sealed every exit, while emergency communications channels opened to Earth's diplomatic corps, the Corvan High Command and the Galactic Council's Crisis Management Division. Within minutes, every major government in known space would know that a human had killed alien royalty during what was supposed to be a peaceful cultural exchange. The lecture hall's blast doors sealed with a resonant clang that made every alien present jump. Security drones descended from hidden alcoves, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson that made the prince's body look even more lifeless. Emma glanced up at the security drones, assessed their positioning and armament capabilities in a single sweep, then returned to her homework. She'd just started an interstellar incident, and her biggest concern appeared to be finishing her assignment on orbital siege tactics. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the note she made in her textbook's margin. Academy threat assessment, revised downward, defensive capabilities insufficient for training environment. The emergency diplomatic channel crackled to life exactly 17 minutes after Prince Zektar's death, which was approximately 16 minutes faster than anyone had expected the Corvan Empire to mobilize their outrage. Ambassador Elena Vasquez appeared on the holographic display with the calm demeanor of someone who'd been expecting this call for weeks. Ambassador Vasquez, snarled High Commander Velkoth, his crystalline features radiating the kind of fury that had historically preceded interstellar wars. Your creature has murdered the heir to the Korgan throne. We demand immediate extradition and execution. Elena took a sip of what appeared to be coffee, a beverage that most aliens found mildly poisonous. and consulted her datapad with bureaucratic precision. According to Academy Regulations Section 12.7, subsection C, any formal combat challenge issued under Academy jurisdiction constitutes legitimate engagement between cadets. Prince Ziktar issued the challenge. Cadet Thompson accepted. The engagement proceeded according to established protocols. Protocols? High Commander Velkoth's voice rose to frequencies that threatened to shatter the communication equipment. She killed him while sitting down. The Academy regulations don't specify a required combat posture, Elena replied with the tone of someone reading assembly instructions. They do, however, clearly state that challenges may be resolved through submission or incapacitation. Prince Ziktar chose incapacitation. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of the Korvan High Command realizing that their prince had been killed, completely within the legal framework they'd helped establish when they joined the Academy's governing council 2 centuries earlier. The security footage leaked approximately 4 hours later, though leaked wasn't the right term for something that appeared simultaneously on every major communication network in the galaxy. Someone, and investigations would never determine who, had compiled a 30-second clip showing Prince Ziktar's attack and Emma's response from 17 different camera angles, including a slow-motion replay that made the biomechanics of the exchange crystal clear. The clip went viral with the kind of speed usually reserved for natural disasters and stock market crashes. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed by approximately 40 billion beings across known space, each one watching a human end an alien prince's life with the casual efficiency of someone swatting an insect. The immediate response was predictable. The Zephyrian Collective withdrew their 3 exchange students from Earth universities. The Bruthan Federation cancelled their upcoming cultural summit. The Vegan Trade Alliance suspended all educational cooperation agreements pending comprehensive safety evaluations. By the end of the first day, 12 different species had severed academic ties with humanity. By the end of the week, that number had climbed to 37. The Galactic Education Network, which had taken 2 centuries to establish, began collapsing as species after species realized they'd been treating apex predators like exchange students. The emergency faculty meeting convened in the Academy's most secure conference room, where Dr. Rebecca Foster stood before a collection of the Academy's most senior xenobiology staff with a presentation that would redefine galactic understanding of human evolution. Gentlemen, Dr. Foster began, activating a holographic display that showed Earth's surface from orbit. We need to discuss what Deathworld actually means. The assembled faculty, representing 17 different species and collectively holding over 4,000 years of academic experience, stared at images of Earth's surface with growing horror. Massive storm systems that could sterilize continents, tectonic activity that regularly reshaped entire landmasses, volcanic eruptions that blocked sunlight for months at a time. The average human experiences approximately 347 life-threatening situations per standard year, Dr. Foster continued, advancing to the next slide. These include but are not limited to severe weather events, seismic activity, exposure to toxic atmospheric conditions, encounters with hostile fauna, contaminated water sources, and what humans classify as normal seasonal variations. A Bruton professor, whose species had conquered civilizations with less hostile environments than Earth's vacation destinations, raised a trembling appendage. How do they survive? They don't, Dr. Foster replied. They thrive. Human neurochemistry doesn't distinguish between fight or flight. It defaults to fight, in approximately 94% of threatening situations. Their stress response system is designed to enhance combat effectiveness rather than facilitate escape. She clicked to the next slide, showing human physiological data that made the room's environmental system struggle to maintain proper atmospheric conditions, as several species began hyperventilating. Bone density 3.7 times galactic average, muscle fiber composition optimized for explosive power generation, reflexes enhanced by evolutionary pressure from predators that make Korvan warforms look like domestic pets. Dr. Foster paused, watching her audience process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about evolutionary biology. But the truly remarkable adaptation, she continued, is psychological. Humans don't develop trauma responses from violence, they develop them from isolation. Their social bonding mechanisms are triggered by shared survival experiences. Combat, for humans, is a recreational activity. The Zephyrin department head, whose species had perfected warfare over millennia, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. What have we done? Dr. Foster closed her presentation with a final slide showing Emma's psychological evaluation scores. Intelligence? Exceptional. Aggression? Within normal human parameters. Threat assessment capability? Rated as concerning by 3 different psychological evaluation protocols. We took an apex predator from a world where everything is trying to kill it, Dr. Foster said, and we put it in a room full of species who think warfare is an academic subject. Then we were surprised when it acted like an apex predator. The room fell silent as 47 of the galaxy's leading academic minds simultaneously realized that humanity hadn't sent them a student. They'd sent them a weapon that was sophisticated enough to pretend to be a student. The formal investigation took place in the Academy's most secure interrogation facility, a room designed to contain beings whose species had conquered star systems through sheer force of will. Emma sat in the same chair she'd occupied during the incident, hands folded in her lap, while a panel of investigators from 7 different species tried to understand what they were dealing with. Chief Investigator Thekmar, a Brothan whose own species had never met a conflict they couldn't solve with overwhelming violence, leaned forward with the kind of intensity usually reserved for war criminals. Cadet Thompson, you killed Prince Zektar with a single movement. Explain your training. Emma looked up from the datapad where she had been working on her xenobiology assignment, an essay about territorial behavior in pack-hunting species that was probably going to give her professors nightmares. Training, combat enhancement, military conditioning, genetic modification. Thekmar's voice carried the frustration of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. No natural being possesses the capability to neutralize a Corvan Royal with such efficiency. I grew up in Detroit, Emma said. The silence that followed was the kind that accompanies the realization that your entire understanding of the universe might be fundamentally flawed. Detroit wasn't a military installation or a training facility. It was a civilian population center on a death world where children learned to navigate hostile environments the same way other species learned basic mathematics. Detroit, repeated Dr. Vexhaler, the Zephyrin psychologist whose job was to evaluate whether Emma posed a continuing threat to Academy personnel. Is this a military designation? It's a city, Emma replied, returning to her assignment. Pretty quiet, actually. Most of the dangerous wildlife moved out decades ago. The investigators exchanged glances that conveyed the growing understanding that they were dealing with something outside their frame of reference. They'd been looking for evidence of specialized training, enhancement procedures, or weapons technology. Instead, they'd found a college student who considered urban survival skills to be basic childhood education. President Thompson, Chief Investigator Thekmar tried again. Describe your assessment of the threat Prince Zektar represented. Emma considered the question with the same analytical approach she applied to her tactical studies homework. Minimal, she said finally. He was enhanced for ceremonial combat, not survival situations. Predictable attack patterns, over-reliance on technological advantages, poor situational awareness. He telegraphed his intentions approximately 7 seconds before initiating contact, and your response was appropriate. Emma looked up again, and for a moment, every being in the room felt the weight of evolutionary pressure that had shaped a species capable of thriving on a world that considered volcanic activity a minor inconvenience. Challenged me to combat, she said. I ended the combat. The simplicity of the statement was what made it terrifying. Emma hadn't seen Prince Zektar as royalty or as a superior being or as anything requiring special consideration. She'd seen him as a problem that needed solving, and she'd solved it with the kind of efficient brutality that characterized every species that had ever crawled to the top of a Deathworld food chain. Chief Investigator Thekmar made a note on his evaluation form that would later become classified at the highest levels of galactic security. The note read, "Recommend immediate revision of all protocols regarding human personnel. Subject displays standard human psychological patterns. This is the concern." The emergency session of the Academy Council convened that same evening in a chamber that had witnessed the establishment of galactic educational standards, the negotiation of interspecies exchange programs, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts that could have sparked wars. Tonight it witnessed something unprecedented, an entire educational institution restructuring itself around the capabilities of a single species. Chancellor Valadrock, whose own species had built their civilization on the principle that knowledge was the ultimate weapon, addressed the assembly with the shell-shocked expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions had been shattered. Effective immediately, all human cadets will be subject to enhanced monitoring protocols. The new regulations were extensive and terrifying in their implications. Human students would no longer be permitted to participate in physical training exercises with non-human cadets. All recreational activities involving humans would require pre-approval from a xenobiology specialist. Combat challenges between humans and other species were permanently prohibited, with violations carrying penalties up to and including expulsion of entire species from the academy. Furthermore, Chancellor Valdrock continued, all faculty and staff will undergo mandatory Deathworld awareness training. This training will cover human psychological patterns, threat assessment capabilities, and emergency response protocols for what the curriculum will euphemistically term cultural misunderstandings. The Academy's head of security, Commander Zek Thul, raised a concerned appendage. Chancellor, what about existing human cadets? Do we extract them? The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. The Academy currently hosted 47 human students across various programs, each one potentially as capable as Emma of redefining galactic understanding of conflict resolution. No, Chancellor Veldrock replied after a pause that felt like geological time. We adapt. The humans stay, but under new guidelines. Think of it as institutional evolution. The most telling change was the establishment of a new department, Deathworld Studies, with Dr. Foster as its first and only professor. The department's mission statement, which would become required reading for every being entering the academy, was simple: to ensure that beings from hostile environments receive appropriate accommodation without compromising the safety of the broader academic community. Dr. Foster's first lecture, attended by every faculty member in the academy, covered what she termed the Deathworld perspective. She explained that humans didn't see violence as aberrant behavior, they saw it as Tuesday. Their entire cultural framework was built around managing, channeling, and occasionally celebrating controlled violence as a form of social interaction. Humans, she concluded, don't have anger management issues, they have anger appreciation skills. The subtext was clear. The Academy had spent 2 centuries preparing for conflicts with external threats. Hostile empires, resource wars, territorial disputes. They'd never prepared for the possibility that the threat might be sitting quietly in the back row of Introduction to Galactic History, taking notes and getting excellent grades. Within weeks, the changes rippled throughout galactic society. Other military academies implemented similar protocols. The Galactic Council established the Deathworld Safety Commission. 3 different species petitioned to have their homeworlds reclassified as moderately challenging rather than risk being compared to Earth. The ripple effects extended far beyond academic institutions. The Galactic Insurance Consortium suddenly found themselves recalculating risk assessments for any policy involving human personnel. Premiums for human-adjacent activities increased by 4,000% overnight. The Interstellar Tourism Board quietly removed Earth from their emerging destinations list and reclassified it under Extreme Adventure Travel Liability Waivers Required. Extreme Adventure Travel Liability Waivers Required. Most significantly, the Galactic Military Defense League, an organization that had maintained peace through superior firepower for 3 centuries, quietly approached Earth's diplomatic corps with a proposal that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. They wanted to discuss mutual defense partnerships and consulting arrangements with what they delicately termed specialist human advisors. The meeting took place in neutral space aboard a diplomatic vessel that had hosted peace negotiations between warring empires. General Cortex, Supreme Commander of Galactic Military Forces, found himself across a negotiating table from Ambassador Vasquez and a single human military advisor whose presence made the ship's environmental systems work overtime to maintain proper atmospheric conditions. The galaxy faces new threats, General Cortex began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never lost a strategic engagement. Our intelligence suggests hostile forces from outside known space may be approaching. We require consultation on defensive strategies. What he didn't say, what everyone in the room understood, was that the galaxy's most powerful military force was asking humanity for protection. The same species they'd been treating as primitive Deathworlders was now their best hope for survival against threats that made their nightmares seem optimistic. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the message that arrived from Earth's diplomatic corps exactly 6 months later, delivered by Ambassador Vasquez with the same bureaucratic politeness she'd used during the initial crisis. The Earth Colonial Administration has received over 12,000 applications for human cadets to attend galactic military academies, she announced, during what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic briefing. This represents a 3,000% increase over previous years. The representatives from 47 different civilizations stared at her, with expressions that suggested they were watching their own extinction being planned in real time. However, Ambassador Vasquez continued, we've also received over 40,000 requests from various species for human military advisors, security consultants, and what your applications rather diplomatically term cultural liaison specialists. The silence that followed was broken by the Corvan representative, whose voice carried the weight of a species that had just learned to fear something they'd never considered a threat. They want us as allies, as everyone wants you as allies, Ambassador Vasquez confirmed. Apparently, the galaxy has decided that if humans are going to be apex predators, it's better to have them as friends than enemies. She smiled with the expression of someone whose species had just accidentally conquered the galaxy through superior friendship. Emma sends her regards, by the way. She's graduating valedictorian.